very, very difficult. Like the problems that seem very obvious are not that obvious. So RPA fails to deliver even on basic level of automation, quite simply because if you increase the complexity by just 1 degree. Intelligent automation, right? Like it deals with that part, but the amount of time and money required to build a solution is really, really intense. So one of the problems you're talking about, machine learning problems. So this is a real example, and because we worked on it, I can give you some numbers. So we estimated we would require about 5,000 types of documents to be tagged, annotated by analysts, and give it to us so that we'll be able to build a model, and it will be operational in 3 months. Seems like a fairly straightforward value proposition. But what I was told is it takes about $60 to annotate a document. And now that times 5,000. We're talking a lot of money. And then the amount of time that is wasted by an analyst who is doing data tagging as opposed to working, that's a loss which we haven't even accounted for. So the industry prefers, in that case, people do everything by hand because they don't want to waste time. So these factors are very crucial when you're building a solution of this sort, right? So if for an academic project, availability of data is difficult, think about industry. Clean data is almost impossible. There have been instances wherein we waited on a European bank for about literally 9 months to get the data before we could even get started on a proof of concept. Essentially what they told us, the wait time costed them so much time and money. They obviously invested a lot further, but to get there, it requires a lot of time and patience. And how many companies can actually sustain waiting for 9 months without doing anything, unless you have other customers supporting you? So these are some of the practical constraints which make adoption of intelligent automation a lot harder. So let's actually evaluate some of them. Expensive and intensive in terms of like time and people, that is fairly straightforward. Yeah, one of the things I want to talk about is the application maintenance, right? So imagine you build a software that takes a bunch of different documents for mortgage application and kind of creates your loan proposal, feeds it into a risk model, and tells you what's the score, and should the loan be given or not. To build this, if you have used an existing data set, and if there is a variation of data sets, like if there is a variation in one of the forms that you're going to process, or some of the contracts that you're going to process. Earlier, we saw when some of the undergrad students were presenting, that when the data variation, like when there was a variation in different manufacturers, how they presented the data, they simply couldn't proceed. So now the industry cannot say like, okay, we need one standardized way to process. If that was the case, probably such companies wouldn't even exist. So we need to be able to support various kinds of data, various structures of data or unstructured data that comes in, which otherwise becomes a fairly useless application. Now, even if you get there, and if let's say the application has been in production for about 3 months, and 4th month there is a variation, if you are again going to take about a month long to redevelop it, doesn't make sense. Actually, we were able to solve that particular problem for one of the largest credit rating agencies in the world. So I can give you that particular example. So the problem which we were presented with was they had given us a particular structured financial document, and the system was producing wrong output. So first hack we did was we gave them something called as a visual feedback. So if the system produces certain outputs, you can overwrite it and manually annotate that part which actually produces the right data. So the next simple question, which kind of defies common sense from the customer's perspective, and rightly so, was, okay, we gave the feedback and we re-uploaded the document. It makes the same mistake which it previously made, which means the feedback actually isn't working. It's a great point, because for the feedback to kick in, you need to restart the model. For you to restart the model, like we're working across the world, which means we get access to the machine only twice a month, which is once every fortnight. Unless we restart, the feedback loop is almost useless. How do you tackle this problem? So So what we did is we use a simple principle wherein every feedback that is given is mapped out to the hash of the document. Now, next time you upload the document, it's not going to run the model because it looks for the hash of the document. If that's the case, it produces the outcome based on what the feedback is, which means the customer sees the view which is an updated model. The next time you restart the model, the hash is completely clear and the model gets updated. So in doing this, we were able to solve a very complex problem, which from the customer's perspective was, we do not want redevelopment. Again, keep in mind, redevelopment is not free of cost. It costs a lot of time and money. So these are some of the tricks that you can do in order to boost the adoption of intelligent automation solutions. So let me now give you a brief of the workflow, this is a typical workflow with which you can model any problems that we solve currently. So essentially, cognitive automation works when the data is fairly unstructured or semi-structured at the best. So we deal with a lot of text-heavy data. So we deal with data from different kinds of documents, different formats of documents, different applications, and web. So these are our primary input sources. Then in the processing part, we break it into 4 components. So one of the dedicated component is document processing. So, or what you call as IDP, Intelligent Document Processing Solution. So whether the data is structured or unstructured, whether the document is structured or unstructured, digital or scanned, we currently support about 9 different languages. So considering all these variations, this block just does the pre-processing part. It actually solves a lot of problems. I would say 50% of our problems that we encounter is solved only using that particular block of software that we have developed.
Question. Can
Yes.
you handle Arabic?
No, it's a right to left. We do not handle that.
Okay, also it's very connected.
Yes.
It's hard to separate the letters.
Yes, we do not support Arabic. That's one of the problems. Though we had requests from a couple of large banks in the Middle East, which wanted to do it. We are in the process of partnering with a forum which is going to help us, but we haven't gotten there.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Finkel. Then comes to the yes.
I'm wondering about this Excel as the target out formula. What part of Excel are you using really? Excel is a powerful software. It can do a lot of computation. Is that what you do? You somehow extract formulas and embed them into Excel?
Not necessarily. So essentially, if you look at what we converted into an Excel sheet would be, so let's say there are documents pertaining to tracking public funds, investment year on year. So let's say if an analyst uploads, let's say a particular fund and is tracking year on year for the past 5 years, so you will have a lot of data in PDFs, and the system has to intelligently identify which tables represent that particular fund, because it's going to be a complex table which has multiple funds. Then there are certain business rules that are given, and these rules are not implicit so that you can use if-then-else kind of programming techniques. You need to have a various kind of exception handling mechanism. So those rules will help you extract this so pre-process the data, extract the data, and put it in an Excel sheet, so that once it's available in an Excel sheet, there is enough software. You're right, Excel is very powerful. It can do all the necessary computation. That's the final part, which typically the analyst will tend to do. So what happens is, if this is not put in an Excel sheet, the amount of time spent in producing the outcome is going to be say 4 hours. Now it's going to be done in 1 hour. So there's a tremendous amount of time saving is what we do. So in the web processing part, initially we worked with mainly financial institutions. So what we call as the golden sources, Morningstar, LexisNexis, some of the registries, regulators, public and private sources, especially for capital markets. So we track nearly about 135 public and private sources for capital markets, about 250 regulators and registries for companies companies and company-related information. So this seems like just a small step, but think about it in the context that if a particular bank is interested to extract this particular piece of information, if they were to do it by hand, they literally need to log in, and they need to wait for the information to be updated. And so they try to log in every 15 minutes or every hour, and think about the distributed team just waiting on one particular update. If they do not do it like the way it's supposed to be done this way, they will have enough resources which are idle. And then what they try to do is they squeeze in more work from that person, like saying, okay, your primary job is this, secondary job is this. And again, the time to market is one of the biggest advantages for every commercial and investment bank. If you are slow, you will not win. So these are some of the constraints that help us kind of deliver the value that a bank or a financial institution actually desires. And this part, right, the natural language understanding part, is automatic text summarization, automatic text classification based on the factors that you define. It could be based on sentiment, intent, or various factors on which an institution is interested to like categorize a piece of information. Natural language query processing, because we're dealing with a lot of document repositories, right? If you can ask a question and your system can kind of synthesize data from multiple documents and produce a concise summary for you, it's much faster. Essentially, we're in the business of saving time for intelligent workflows. And finally, the entity extraction part. The entity extraction part seems very simple and obvious, but again, like we spend a lot of time building like various modules for different kinds of entity extraction. Again, language variations and quite simply how sometimes the scan quality is bad. To build that, it takes a lot of time and effort. And once you build this, so this is what we call as a platform. And from this particular platform, you can derive a number of use cases, which is what the ultimate products or the customer buys from us. So then finally, the computer vision part, right? So OCR, we came up with our own OCR engine, because most of the open source OCR do a fairly good job, but when you're talking about like very specific kind of things, they do not work. Again, being in a specific domain, we understand like OCR for financial institutions, OCR for pharma companies. That helps us kind of like beat a lot of competition in the market. We support about like 37 different kinds of tables. If you look at it, extraction of data from tables looks like a very obvious problem, because when you're thinking of tables, you're thinking of like rows and columns in a particular sheet, right? What you're not thinking is there are borderless tables. There are dotted lines. There are tables flowing multiple pages, and there are tables which are one after the other. So there are 37 different variations that we support, and we believe it's not exhaustive. We could probably be doing at least 15 or 16 more. So these are built-in tech that help us reduce the development time of the software, and hence reduce the constraints and hence foster the adoption of intelligent automation in a slightly better way. Finally, in terms of output, right? Industry relies on, as you were mentioning, some of the tools, and I was able to relate to it very clearly, that industry relies on these tools, and if you are giving in pre-built integrations, it obviously encourages them to go ahead with it. So with this, how do you actually improve? So in 2019, we published a paper called Dept. It was published at AAAI at Stanford. It's called Dexter Stride.ai if you Google. So one of the key things we did was borrowed the concept from zero-shot learning, which means like how do you make the learning minimal, right? Like a few examples to get started. So if you can get started with few examples, it wouldn't be like 10 or 12 examples, but so think about it. Going to a bank and asking for 5,000 samples is going to be difficult. But going to a bank and asking for 100 samples is more plausible. They might think, okay, if I do this, maybe I'll see something. So 100 is a good number to show that you can try it on additional 100 documents which are blind samples and see if it is working at least for 80%. That's when they feel confident in you, like, okay, like I can take a bet, so that probably you will be able to, when I get it into production, you might do a good job. Because 80% accuracy is a very good number. again, the assumption would be like people are 100% accurate. Trust me, people are not 100% accurate. Think about yourself at 8 o'clock with the first cup of coffee, and Friday evening, 6 o'clock. Are you going to be 100% on Friday evening? So next is like becoming enterprise ready. Supporting integration, knowing what tools they use, even like their IT policies, right? Pharma companies have different IT policies. Mining companies have different IT policies. Obviously, financial institutions have IT policies. If you're going to like build something, make sure you're enterprise ready. The real-time feedback loop, which I gave an example, is a very good mechanism to help win the confidence. Finally, we are working on a very ambitious idea here. It's in the very early stages, so we're trying to do this, right? We built like some sample software. So if you point out a table, like I told you, we support 37 different types of tables. So we have a particular software that you can take, you can just using your mouse, draw a border, it'll figure out which 37 type of table it is in, the nearest match, and it'll extract the data. What we saw is like, we've seen unbelievable levels of accuracy. Like we tested it on at least about 3,000 samples, and we were at like 96% accuracy. So we're trying to build what we call as a low-code studio, wherein an analyst should not have a constraint of not knowing programming in order to try building a proof of concept. Because an analyst would have much more understanding of the domain compared to most of the software engineers. So why not enable him or her to go ahead and try to build something on their own? If that kind of helps them build the confidence, it's better for the industry and better for the adoption rate of the intelligent automation solutions. Finally, where do you think I got the learning from? Yeah, some of the largest companies in the world that we've worked with for the past 5+ years. So some of the names you might be familiar with, ING, Moody's, Standard Chartered, or Natixis. And so these are the various industries, and we're not restricted to financial services anymore. That's a new change we're seeing this year, especially with the dynamics of the world changing. Intelligent automation is not a luxury or an experiment, but it's a real requirement. We've seen like mining companies, we've seen pharma companies approaching us, and we've worked with them already. Some of the typical use cases, enterprise KYC and equity research, trade finance, mortgage documents. So these are some of the typical use cases. So if any of the customer wants to work on this, we already have the solutions built in, so we don't need to waste more time. The teams typically that we work with are compliance and regulation, quality assurance, business operations, research, credit, and market risk. So these are some of the large teams that we work with. Proof, some of the nice testimonials from the customers. So what we have done has actually been beneficial for these customers. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in business. Customers have been really, really gracious on us. And with that, I would leave the room open for any questions you may have.
What is KYC?
Oh, okay. KYC stands for Know Your Customer. So if you are opening a bank account, like you need to turn in your ID. However, if you are a business, let's say you are like a big shipping corporation, trying to get onboarded into, let's say, an ING's wealth management system, what happens is they need to run a bunch of checks before they onboard you. So those would be like identifying if your board of directors are someone who is a politically exposed person or not. What's the reputation on your company in the last 3 to 6 months? There are sources that give you news bits. But then there should be analysts reading those news bits and say, okay, you know what? These many items were negative on this particular entity, and these many were positive, and these many were neutral. And the thing is, they're given like an hour's time to read about 200 articles. So they just mark everything as high risk. And that's really not good. Then you have to check whether the company's registration details are clear, the regulatory approvals are okay. Do they have offices in countries which have embargoes? So there is a list of about 16 checks, which are represented in 8 different modules. The current, on an average, time to onboard an institutional customer for 23 working days. So we were able to bring that time down to 5 working days. Obviously, I mean, they will be able to get started quickly, and customers will prefer to work with a bank which has less onboarding time. And again, it's like banks don't love to do KYC. It's a mandate. The cost of not doing KYC properly is literally millions of dollars. If you Google the term like ING fines or Standard Chartered fines or NetExis fines, I guarantee you it will be nothing less than $100 million per year in the past 3 years. So that's the kind of money they have to save for fines.
Other questions?
So, Vijay, tell a little bit about Strike. Where is it located? How big is it? And what are challenges in setting up a company, especially in India, maybe?
Definitely, yeah. So we are based in Bangalore, India. Though we are a Delaware C-Corp, we also operate an Indian entity. We're a team of 32 people, primarily tech. I play the role of CEO. My primary role is to figure out like what tech will work with, for which customers, and obviously sales and raising funds for the company. The challenges, and we support customers ranging from Australia to Brazil. So we have customers in every continent but Antarctica. So that's that's a good thing. The challenges, Dr. Ramchik, are, so when you start a business, right, you think you solve a particular problem, everything will work. But in reality, like, when you have more than 20 people, you come under a lot of regulation and compliance, right? How do you make sure your taxes are paid off? How do you make sure that your employees, India introduced a new law called POSH compliance, prevention of sexual harassment, and that law makes it necessary to have a committee which deals with this. So we did not know any of these things, and then we were getting notices from people. And then we hired a team of accountants, lawyers, and compliance officers to deal with these particular things, which obviously isn't super easy. But then, you learn these things. Like, as you start running the business, you have no option but to learn and survive. So that's where we are today. Thank you so much for having me here.
Well, thank you. It's always good to see when one of our own students is successful in the real world. And it looks like this is a great success. How long will you be in town?
I'll be here only until today.
Until today. So if you have any more questions, ask them right now.
Yeah, you have my email. I can give you my